I never thought the worst injury of my life would end up saving the one relationship that actually mattered. A decade after a firefight nearly took my face off, my own family looked at what was left of me like it was something to hide from party guests. They had no idea what that scar was about to buy back for me. Don't call me your brother. The existence of you and that kid is the biggest stain on this family. The slap from my own biological sister landed square across my heavily scarred face, right in the middle of a crowded cafe. Vanessa trampled my dignity with a grin on her face, completely ignoring little Sophia, who was gripping the hem of my shirt, cowering in terror. I took the full weight of that hit from my own blood and stood rooted to the spot. Not one tear. I stared straight at her through a suffocating, dead silence, and that composure hit her like gasoline on a fire. She whipped around, barking at her husband. "Ryan, are you just going to stand there and let your brother-in-law disrespect me? Deal with this failure." Ryan didn't move. The second his eyes landed on my mangled face, every drop of color drained out of him. This massive man stumbled back 3 full steps, pupils blown wide with something close to terror, stammering out a sentence that froze even Vanessa in place. "Impossible. Is that Captain Reed?" Before I get into it, take a second to like and subscribe if you want to know how this ends, and drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is right now. That name, Reed, hit my eardrums like a concussion grenade. The cafe, the staring crowd, my sister's twisted face, all of it dissolved. It dragged my mind 10 years backward, straight into the blinding fluorescent lights of a military trauma ward. I remembered waking up to searing heat consuming the entire left side of my face, like someone had poured molten iron across my cheekbone and left it to cool into my skin. The sterile stench of antiseptic burned my nostrils until my eyes watered. Military surgeons in green scrubs stood at the foot of my bed, voices hushed. They called me a hero. Told me the shrapnel I'd absorbed when our Humvee hit an IED outside Fallujah had saved every man in that vehicle. Every soldier walked away breathing because the left side of my face caught what would have shredded through the cabin. I raised a trembling hand and brushed my fingers against the thick gauze wrapping my skull. It felt alien, like touching someone else's body. Despite the agony radiating from jaw to temple, I felt a strange, quiet pride swelling in my chest. The whole ward treated my wound like a badge of supreme valor. Nurses adjusted my IV with something close to reverence. A 2-star general personally pinned a purple heart to my hospital gown while I was still too drugged to fully understand what was happening. I naively believed that if the Marine Corps honored my sacrifice with medals and salutes, my own wealthy family would finally look at me the same way. I convinced myself the worst was over. I'd survived Fallujah. Cheated death. I thought the war was finished. I had no idea the real psychological slaughterhouse was waiting for me back home, dressed in designer clothes and smelling like expensive perfume. When the military transport dropped me at the family estate a month later, there was no banner, no embrace. The iron gate swung open into dead silence. Gravel crunched under my boots as I dragged my duffel toward the entrance. I stepped into the marble foyer and the sound of my uneven footsteps echoed off the high ceilings into nothing. I expected my parents to rush forward. Instead, they stood by the parlor doors, avoiding my eyes, whispering nervously to the staff like they were coordinating how to handle an unwelcome guest. Then my sister came down the grand staircase, her expensive floral perfume hitting me before she did, masking the clinical smell still clinging to my bandages. She didn't ask if I was in pain. Didn't cry with relief that I'd survived a war zone. Didn't even glance at the cane keeping me upright. She locked eyes on my freshly unbandaged, jagged cheek, and her face twisted into pure revulsion. She stepped back like the sight of me was contagious. She didn't even speak to me directly, she turned to the butler. Keep him in the guest house during the gala this weekend. I won't have my guests looking at that. That was my homecoming. No heroes welcome. Just instructions to hide me like broken furniture before the important people showed up. I gripped the canvas strap of my duffel bag so tight the material bit into my palm. My parents said nothing. My father stared at the grandfather clock. My mother smoothed her blouse over and over like the motion could erase the discomfort of having a scarred son standing in her pristine foyer. The next morning, I walked into the dining room determined to make them acknowledge my existence. The table was set with silver cutlery, crystal glasses, a centerpiece of white lilies that probably cost more than a month of my military pay. My sister sat at the head, scrolling her phone with one hand, coffee cup in the other. As I pulled out a chair, the legs scraping the hardwood, she slammed her cup onto the saucer hard enough to echo through the room like a gunshot. She stared straight at my scar. "You're terrifying my friends and ruining the corporate brand," she sneered, cutting into her steak without breaking eye contact. "I'll pay for unlimited plastic surgery. I'll hire the best doctors in the country. But until then, you stay out of sight, and you never mention your disgusting military service to anyone in our circle again." I gripped the edge of my chair under the table, knuckles white. My parents' silence across the table was deafening confirmation. My father kept chewing. My mother took a long sip of water, eyes fixed on the lily centerpiece. They were complicit not through cruelty, through cowardice. And cowardice, I learned that morning, cuts just as deep. I stood there letting the toxicity of her words wash over me like a chemical burn, and in that exact fraction of a second I understood my own bloodline valued a flawless public image more than my survival. More than the blood I'd spilled for this country. More than the nerves permanently destroyed in my cheek. I didn't argue. Didn't scream. Didn't shed a single tear to beg for their approval. I turned on my heel and marched upstairs. I bypassed the closets full of designer clothes gathering dust since before deployment, pulled out my olive drab duffel and packed nothing but the essentials, 3 sets of clothes, my medals in their wooden case, a photo of my unit. I walked past the bewildered staff and my silent, cowardly parents, out through the massive front doors, into the freezing air, choosing exile over a life of hidden shame. Nobody followed. Nobody called my name. Just the crunch of frozen gravel as I walked away from the only family I'd ever known. Transitioning to civilian life without my family's money was like trying to breathe underwater. I dropped the family name off every form. Captain Reed became just Ethan, a faceless worker in an unforgiving city. My accounts were empty, I'd flatly refused my sister's hush money. Desperate for income, I took overnight shifts at a logistics warehouse on the industrial edge of town. Hands once trained to field strip an M4 in under 30 seconds were now blistered and bleeding from hauling crates 12 hours straight. I swallowed my pride and clocked in every night without complaint. I stood in grocery store lines counting loose change from a Ziploc bag just to make rent on a drafty studio. I ate rice and canned beans 5 nights a week and called it a win every time I made it to month's end with the lights still on. The physical labor was nothing next to the psychological toll of navigating civilians. Interviewers would take one look at the jagged scar and their polite expressions would crack, eyes averted, sudden urgent need to shuffle papers, some fabricated excuse to show me the door. One hiring manager knocked over his own coffee just to have a reason to avoid the handshake. In the warehouse break room, I'd sit alone with cold coffee, listening to coworkers whisper wild rumors that I was the victim of domestic abuse, a car wreck, that an ex had thrown acid on me. I never corrected them. Never mentioned Fallujah, the IED, the burning Humvee, or the Marines who owed me their lives. I let them stare. I let them whisper. Instead of living under my family's toxic pity, I chose to leave. I chose a simple life, work hard, save every penny. I poured every ounce of frustration into pushing heavier loads, working doubles, proving my worth through competence instead of appearance. My supervisor noticed. Within 6 months, I was leading the night crew not out of pity, but because nobody moved freight with the precision of a former Marine logistics officer. I survived poverty by leaning on the only thing that hadn't betrayed me, Marine Corps discipline. Every morning 5:30 sharp, no alarm clock needed. I stepped onto the cold linoleum and made my bed with taut military corners, same motion that used to smooth a rack at Camp Lejeune, same motion that tucked a thermal blanket around a wounded corporal in a freezing foxhole outside Fallujah while tracers streaked overhead. I polished my boots under a bare bulb and planned my weekly budget in a spiral notebook with tactical precision. Every dollar had a job. That relentless routine became armor, kept the PTSD at bay, replaced nightmares with structure. It was a silent war for dignity, fought in the shadows of a city that didn't care if I lived or died. Late at night after shifts, I'd stand at the cracked bathroom sink and run my fingers over the ridged, angry tissue of my cheek. A daily reminder of the burning Humvee, the men we nearly lost. But I never once let a tear fall for what I'd sacrificed or the family that discarded me. I've never regretted this scar. It's a medal of blood and honor. Proof I survived something my sister couldn't comprehend from the back of her chauffeured car. The unexpected arrival of my daughter Sophia shifted the entire gravity of my universe. She came through a brief relationship with a fellow veteran who died in a motorcycle accident before he even knew I was expecting. I buried that grief the way I buried everything, and redirected every ounce of energy into the new mission growing in my life. That 5:30 wake-up stopped being punishing discipline and became sacred labor of love. In the blue twilight, I'd slip out of bed, warm a bottle in the kitchen, the old fridge humming in a way that sometimes made the hair on my neck stand up because it sounded like a generator on a forward base. I'd push the reflex down and focus on the steam curling off the bottle. For the first time since leaving the military, I had a real mission again. Not one requiring a weapon. One requiring patience and a kind of bravery I'd never trained for. As Sophia grew, she became my unknowing savior. She never once looked at me and saw the monster my sister declared me to be. One quiet Sunday, sitting on my lap while I read her a picture book, her tiny fingers reached up without hesitation and traced the jagged edges of my cheek. She giggled, tapping it. "Mommy, I mean Daddy, do these lines lead to buried treasure?" I pressed my lips together hard against the knot in my throat. That simple, unconditional acceptance shattered the armor I'd spent years building. She's the only anchor keeping me in this life, helping me bury the battlefield and the pain of being discarded by my own blood. She healed wounds no surgeon ever could. She never needed medals to see my worth. She just needed her father's scarred face to fall asleep looking at. Driven to give her a better life, I pushed relentlessly, leveraged my logistics record, and landed a stable position as a supply chain coordinator downtown. To my coworkers, I was just a stern, 42-year-old widower who ate lunch alone and stayed out of office gossip. I wore plain clothes, kept my head down, ran shipping routes with military precision, and earned respect through competence, not appearance. Nobody in that office had the slightest idea about the combat medals locked in a box in my closet, or the media empire I'd walked away from. I was content being a ghost. Ghosts don't get interrogated. Ghosts don't get pitied. They just do the job and go home to the people who matter. We built a small, isolated fortress in our apartment. Quiet evenings on a worn sofa, Sophia tucked under my arm, entirely disconnected from the elite world that cast me out. But beneath that calm, my tactical instincts stayed sharp. I scanned playgrounds before letting her run for the swings. Checked the deadbolts twice every night. Cataloged the cars parked on our street, the blue sedan, the white pickup, the dented minivan, noting anything new, any plate I didn't recognize. Not paranoia. Hardwired instinct from a man who knew from brutal experience that something this fragile could shatter with one careless moment. Escaping my family physically didn't mean escaping their reach over the city. My sister's surgically perfect face was everywhere, magazine covers at every newsstand, headlines calling her a champion of family values, a philanthropic visionary. Every time a cold wave of disgust hit me, I knew the monster behind that image. I knew about the guest house, the demand to hide my own face. I'd pull my collar up over my scar and keep walking. I wanted nothing to do with her empire of lies. She could keep her magazine covers. I had Sophia. Worth more than every company she controlled. On a crisp Saturday, I took my daughter to Groundwork Cafe, a small indulgence I factored into my tight weekly budget under the line item sanity. I carried her on my hip through the heavy glass doors into the smell of roasted espresso, found our usual corner table against the exposed brick, and instinctively sat with my back to the wall, eyes on the exits. 2 exits, 18 patrons seated, 4 at the bar. I clocked it all before I even sat down. The cafe was packed with the city's elite that morning, thick with cologne and the clink of jewelry against china. I ignored the condescending looks at my worn jeans and scuffed boots and focused entirely on Sophia, sipping my coffee, listening to her babble about the drawings pinned up in her kindergarten classroom. For a few precious minutes, the world outside our little table stopped existing. My guard was down. Just enough. Sophia, overcome with excitement demonstrating how big her drawing was, swung her arm wide and clipped her hot chocolate mug with her elbow. It tipped in slow motion. My combat reflexes fired, hand snapping out, but the table was cramped, my forearm wedged against the sugar dispenser, and I was half a beat too slow. The mug cracked against the table edge and scalding liquid splashed across a designer handbag belonging to a woman passing by. I looked up to apologize, and the blood in my veins turned to ice. Vanessa. She recognized my scarred face instantly, and her camera-ready expression twisted into raw hatred. 10 years of contempt detonated behind her eyes. She didn't care a 6-year-old was involved. She pointed her ruined bag at Sophia's face like a weapon. Are you blind? You failure. You parasite. Your father is a useless man and you're just inferior trash. Her voice hit a pitch that cut through the whole cafe like a siren, silencing every conversation, dragging a terrified child into a fight that had nothing to do with her. I lunged forward, folding my body over the table to wrap Sophia in my arms, pressing her head to my chest, covering her ears. I could feel her heart hammering against my forearm. My jaw locked so tight it ached. I checked her arms, her lap dry, unburned, terrified but safe. That was all that mattered. Once I confirmed she was unharmed, I stood, spine snapping into perfect posture, the exhausted civilian father gone, replaced by a Marine captain who'd faced worse than a screaming socialite with a ruined purse. I locked eyes with my sister, no fear, no submission. I'll pay for the bag. But first you apologize to my daughter. She let out a mocking laugh. Pay with your pathetic salary. What gives you the right to demand anything from me? I closed the distance 6 inches, no more. You just insulted a child who did nothing wrong. Insult me all you want. Apologize to her right now. The room went dead still. Chairs creaked. The barista stopped grinding beans. Everyone felt it, the point of no return. If you've ever felt the crushing weight of a toxic family member trying to humiliate you in public, hit that like button. It takes real strength to stand up to your own blood. Share your story in the comments if you've ever had to draw a hard line to protect your peace. My refusal to cower shattered her illusion of control completely. Her face flushed dark with fury, veins pulsing at her throat. "You give me orders," she yanked her phone out, jabbing a nail inches from my scar. "I'll show you the price of insolence." The bag was forgotten. This was never about chocolate. She dialed her legal team right there in front of the whole cafe. "Get Child Protective Services on the line. I want a psych evaluation. I'll prove this violent, unstable veteran has severe PTSD. I'll strip her of custody and put that kid in the system for good." She weaponized my combat trauma as a legal knife aimed straight at my heart. I felt Sophia's hand twist into my shirt so hard the stitching strained, her small body shaking. She couldn't understand the legal terms flying across the cafe, but she understood the danger of being torn from her father instinctively. She pressed her face into my hip, and I felt her tears soak through denim. My vision tunneled. Every combat instinct screamed to close the distance and end the threat. I calculated the angle, the pressure needed to knock the phone from her hand. But I knew one punch, and I'd hand her exactly the evidence she needed to take Sophia. I breathed in for 4, held 4, out for 4. Same pattern I used before kicking doors in Fallujah. Vanessa ended the call with a triumphant, twisted smile, certain she'd finally broken the stubborn brother who'd walked away from her empire a decade ago. She crossed her arms and waited for me to crumble. I didn't blink. I repeat. Apologize to my daughter. That quiet command was a lit match on a powder keg. She lost it completely, lunged forward with a scream and swung her open hand, delivering the slap that cracked across my scarred cheek and severed our bloodline for good. In the frozen second after that slap, Ryan, the massive former Marine who'd just stepped forward to carry out his wife's order, broke down completely in front of the entire cafe. His fists, coiled and ready seconds ago, fell limp at his sides, trembling. He stumbled back 3 steps. "Impossible. Is that Captain Reed?" His voice cracked, chest heaving. He stared at my scarred face and I watched it hit him, the burning Humvee, the IED tearing the road apart, the smell of scorched metal, the weight of a body being dragged through sand. 10 years of buried memory crashing back at once. The realization that he'd just been ordered to attack the person who'd pulled his unconscious, bleeding body out of that wreckage short-circuited him entirely. Not a fork moved in that cafe. Vanessa grabbed his arm, nails digging into his jacket, screaming at him to stop being a coward. He ripped his arm free, sending her stumbling sideways in her heels, and turned on her with pure disgust, not at me, at himself. "Do you know who you just hit?" His voice tore through the cafe loud enough to rattle the windows. "This is Captain Reed of the Marine Corps. He walked into fire in Fallujah in 2014. Used half his face to shield me from shrapnel just to drag my worthless life out of that Humvee." He pointed a shaking finger at my ruined cheek. The revelation tore through the room like a shockwave. The real slap wasn't the one across my face. It was the truth vomited out by her own husband in front of everyone she'd ever tried to impress. The collective gasp sucked the air out of the cafe. Vanessa stood frozen, mouth open, her carefully built empire disintegrating in real time. I refused to just stand there and let someone else fight my battle. I stepped around the spilled chocolate, closed the distance until I could see my own reflection in her wide pupils, and leaned in, my voice dropping to an ice-cold whisper meant only for her. "You wanted to know the price of insolence, Vanessa. This is it. Your empire, your wealth, your perfect marriage, all of it built on the miserable life I saved. Now watch it burn." From a table near the back, a distinguished man in his 60s pushed his chair back. Retired Navy colonel, silver hair, a jaw carved from granite, had watched the entire thing unfold. He stood, snapped his heels together and raised a flawless salute in my direction, honoring the sacrifice I'd made on the battlefield. The whole cafe went silent with respect. I held his gaze, chin lifted, and returned a sharp nod, acknowledging a brotherhood my blood family could never buy or take from me. Ryan's confession set off a bigger explosion. A young reporter 2 tables away had been filming the whole thing on her phone from the first scream. The footage went live while Vanessa still stood there with her mouth open. Within minutes, patrons were pulling out their own phones to document the fallout. Before Vanessa could process her humiliation, the cafe doors swung open and a patrol officer marched in. "Who threw the strike?" Half a dozen patrons pointed straight at Vanessa, phones out showing the footage. He pulled cuffs off his belt. "Ma'am, you're being charged with assault." He ignored her hysterical threats to call the mayor. She turned to Ryan, silently begging him to fix it. He shook his head slowly, eyes full of shame, not at me, at himself, for staying silent about Fallujah for a decade while wearing the suit she bought and cashing checks from a company built on the life I'd helped him survive to build. He stepped back, putting deliberate distance between them, and positioned himself like a shield in front of me and Sophia. Choosing sides. Publicly. Permanently. As they walked my weeping sister out to the squad car, I crouched to Sophia's level, wrapped her tight, felt her heartbeat slowing against my chest, kissed her hair. "Everything's okay now, sweetheart. Nobody's taking you away from me. I promise." She held on like I was the only solid thing left in the world. For her, I was. 4 weeks later, the viral video had completely dismantled my sister's media empire. 40 million views. News outlets picked it up within hours. Lost contracts, plummeting stock, board members publicly distancing themselves, a total boycott of everything with her name on it. The courtroom was dead silent the day of the hearing. I expected a dozen lawyers flanking her. Instead, she walked to the podium alone, heels clicking unevenly, gaunt, stripped of her designer armor, wearing a plain dark blouse hanging off her diminished frame. Facing the judge, looking straight at me, she broke down sobbing. She confessed to the court that her cruelty wasn't born of superiority but pure jealousy of a resilience she could never buy. That my scars reminded her real sacrifice existed, and she'd never made one. She accepted every punitive measure, mandatory therapy, financial damages, without a single argument. I sat still at the plaintiff's bench, hands flat on the table. No smile of victory. No insult thrown back. Just a slow, deliberate nod, acknowledging her repentance without offering reconciliation. The gavel came down. Justice was served. But some fractures don't repair. They just get swept up and stored somewhere they can't cut you anymore. 3 quiet months passed. Life with Sophia returned to its rhythm, free from my family's shadow. One Saturday morning, a brown package sat on the welcome mat, no return address. Inside, wrapped in bubble wrap, was the exact limited edition coloring book Sophia had pressed her hands against a bookstore window to admire weeks before the cafe incident. The one I'd had to walk her away from because it cost more than our grocery budget. Someone had been paying close attention to a moment I thought nobody noticed. Beneath it, a handwritten letter from Vanessa, ink blurred by tears, detailing therapy, diagnosis, every specific memory, the dining room, the guest house order, the staircase, and how sick each one made her now. Clipped to the back, a short note from Ryan thanking me again for Fallujah, for dragging him through the sand, for the 10 years of life he got to live because of half my face. I stood in my kitchen reading it, coffee maker gurgling behind me. No anger left. Just the heavy sincerity of 2 flawed people who'd finally understood the cost of their cruelty. I didn't throw the letter away. I walked to my bedroom, pulled the same oak lock box I'd carried out of that estate a decade ago, and laid the letter beside my silver star and purple heart. To me, that letter was as hard-won a victory as any medal I'd bled for in Fallujah. Final closure on both wars. That afternoon, I sat on my porch, coffee in hand, watching Sophia color a dragon purple and gold, completely ignoring the suggested palette. The golden hour light hit my scarred cheek, and for the first time it didn't look grotesque. It looked radiant. Proof of survival. She looked up, caught me watching, and gave me a gap-toothed grin. I raised my mug toward her. No more wars to fight. No more toxic family to endure. Just peace. Sometimes justice isn't decided in a courtroom. It's decided by the choices we make. This was cold verdict. Because every story has a verdict.